If you're ready for freedom from the grind, then passive income from real estate investing is the best way to get you there. If you don't know where to start or what to do next, then the Rent Roll Radio Show is the best place to get you there. Join us while we discuss the best practices, strategies, and mindset you'll need and give you actionable content to get you from where you are to where you want to be. Hey, Rent Roll Radio listeners, as always, I'm your host, Sterling Chapman. Today, we're joined by Andrea Foley with Generational Wealth Capital. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on today.
Andrea, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us your backstory, where you came from, what you're doing today, how you got into real estate?
Yeah, I got into real estate back in 2005. My husband and I bought our first home. And we live and flipped that house. So, took us quite a while with being only 23 years old and starting that. And eventually sold that in the worst possible time, which was 2009. Luckily for us, the Midwest wasn't hit quite as hard as everywhere else with the crash. But we still made a profit on that first house. And then we just continued to do that as well as build up a single family rental portfolio. And we sold all of that in 2017 so that I could focus on my business, because I started a business in 2007, ran that up until last year, while also doing real estate and other things. It was a retail store. So actually started as a diaper service. So I washed people's poopy diapers for them.
What?
Yeah. Out of my basement. And then
I love it. Do the hard job. That is so awesome. But I was like, that's like our motto around the office. So we just like launched property management business and people are calling us like, are you willing to manage in this area? And it's like, yeah, we'll do the hard work. We'll do the hard work. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah. The dirty jobs, right? Yeah. So that's one of the dirtiest.
Yeah.
Then I opened a couple locations and I was able to step away from it and be kind of an absentee owner for the last couple of years before I sold it. And so in that time, I focused more on real estate and did some business consulting, like traveled around the country, helping other business owners like get their stuff together, right? Like learn how to be operationally more and fiscally more intelligent. And and then sold that in 2022. But we bought our first, when we decided to dive back into real estate, we just were like, let's go big or go home, right? And so we ended up buying, long story, but we ended up looking for hotels to convert into apartments because of multifamily just being a little trickier to get into when you're trying to do it all by yourself. I had zero network, zero contacts, zero anything. And so it just seemed so much easier to me to take a hotel and turn it into apartments than to build a network and like partner with people. So that's what we did. In 2021, we bought our first little hotel, 32 units, and converted it into an apartment complex.
Awesome. Where was that?
Craig, Colorado. It's a little town. It's like 10,000 people.
That's awesome. And so so hotel conversions, they always kind of scared me because of the room size and everything. And it's I have this bias because of where I live, I think. And so I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, right? So I live I live in a city, but in general, the South is more rural and more spread out, right? And we have room, so my partners from my apartment complexes live in New York and I live in Louisiana. And I have a 4,400 square foot house on 4 acres and they have an 1,800 square foot apartment and that costs more than my 4,400 house on the acres because we're more spread out. So hotel conversions in my mind work in areas like Washington, D.C. or New York, you know what I mean? Where people are happy to have a 940 square foot room, to live in. Yeah. I think that would be a hard sell in South Louisiana, just, from space. And does that kind of come into y'all's underwriting? Like when you're picking a market, how do you decide where you're going to buy?
Yeah, so it's not, because we do focus on the Midwest, which I would say the same thing is true in the Midwest as it is in Louisiana, where we have room, right? We're used to our big houses and our big lots and our space. We don't pay for parking anywhere, right? So
right.
We're used to that. But it's more about the market doesn't necessarily need to demand space, more so who it is that we're catering to. And
Affordability.
so that's where I can focus on these tiny little markets, because if there's a demand if there's a industry driver
Mm-hmm.
and there are tons of workers and it's either a lower wage industry, or it's like people coming from out of state to live there temporarily to support that industry. So it's either not people's full-time living, maybe they just live there during the week and then they go home, or it is the only option for someone who maybe makes minimum wage or barely above as an option to live in. So they're not as concerned about space. And I get this all the time with hotel conversions.
Let me ask you this, because you just described two completely different tenant classes, and I would imagine they probably don't interact well, right?
It's interesting because the people that come and don't live there, they are coming and they're like, it's basically a place to store their clothes. And then they're working 12-hour days, 14-hour days. So like they're there, they go work. Like one of ours is they're mechanical engineers. And so like they come there, they're a higher class person, right? Like they make a lot of money, but they're there just as a place to lay their head. They go on site and work 12-hour days, come back, lay their head and start all over again. Or maybe they're workers working on a solar plant. Awesome. So they're not necessarily wanting to interact with everyone they live around.
So down here, what we have a lot, we have plants everywhere. And so what's big in the South is RV parks. And it's the same concept. It's like you've got some trash, you got some like lower income criminal activity type of stuff going on. And I'm not pairing those together. Those are separate issues, but sometimes run into them in the same places.
Yeah.
And then you've got your plant workers who make 175 grand a year working 80 hours a week. And they just need their 6 hours in their little RV and before they head back to the plant.
Yeah. I would say that's almost the exact same demographic. Yeah.
Right.
The local people who make, or who maybe have gotten kicked out of other apartments, and then they're getting a shot at this one temporarily, until that doesn't work out.
Have you had any issues between tenants or, late night party? And like, have you had more of that than maybe in a traditional type of environment?
Well, and this first one is a smaller property, so it could be a bigger issue with a bigger property. But honestly, we've only had like 2 or 3 people who've been like one was a young couple who just like fought all the time. Right. And so then she would call the cops on him, and there's just like that kind of energy. But between tenants, I would say we've never had an issue. So, you're always going to have those one-off people that live in affordable housing.
To your point, you're probably better off without the amenities, right?
Oh yeah.
No pool. Nobody's getting invited by the pool.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And they don't. We don't even have fitness centers. We don't have a pool. Awesome. And that's another thing a lot of people can't wrap their brain around when they're considering hotel conversions is like, well, dishwashers and full-size ovens and pools and, fitness centers, like those aren't the things drawing people to this apartment.
Right. So the other thing you'd mentioned before we started recording, was it car washes?
Yeah. Yep.
I'd love to hear more about the car washes. I've got a friend of mine who has a local car wash for sale, and if I don't know anything about them, convince me to buy it. I'd love to buy it. I just don't know anything about them.
Yeah, well, we can talk offline about it and tell you if you should or not.
What is tell me about it. Let's go into car washes. How do you underwrite them? How do you find them? How do you make money? I don't know anything. Like tell me, explain to me like I'm a third grader. How do you buy car washes?
I am super spoiled because my husband's been selling and installing car washes for the last 10 years. Oh, wow. So that is what he does for a living. That's his W-2.
He sells car washes.
Yep.
How do you sell a car wash? So he'll go to like a gas station and sell the drive-through thing?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. That's so he doesn't do the buildings, but it's everything else, like all equipment, all chemicals, all just everything. So he works for a distributor, and the distributor pulls in all the manufacturers of all the different equipment pieces. And then he has those as options to sell to car wash owners and like what they're looking for. So that's what he's been doing for 10 years.
Awesome. So you use that skill set to go and buy
Yeah.
your own car washes.
Yep.
So what do you look for? Like, where do you start when you determine?
So there's so many different pieces to the car wash industry, and I will say that what we're doing is different than what other private equity groups are focusing right now in regards to car washes. So they're focusing on what are called tunnels, which is where, you pull in and the belt pulls you along and all the wraps, clean your car, all the brushes. Those are attractive for their high gross volume. So they might do 3 million a year in sales. So they're more attractive. However, if you're just looking at from a high level perspective, but knowing the industry as well as he does, and then with my business expertise and like diving inside of the industry, and we have the advantage of knowing what all of his clients do for business, right? So over half of the car wash industry is actually what are called IBAs, which are in-bay automatic machines, which is where you pull into the bay and the machine goes around you. And it can be touchless, meaning it's just the water and the chemicals. So nothing touching your car and potentially damaging it. So that's 54% of the industry is made up of those machines, but they're not as sexy as a tunnel. So people don't realize that. And they, depending on location and traffic counts, they might not make quite as much gross, but the net is way higher.
Because it's less expensive and it's got less liability.
And for us, what draws us to that particular segment is no staff or one part-time employee. Whereas with a tunnel, you have a minimum of like 20 staff members. I came from retail where I had, 10 plus staff members, and it just was the biggest challenge, right? So if we can avoid starting another business where we have to have 20 employees per site, that's our goal.
No, for sure. So you're not raising capital to buy these like you'd mentioned, you're not doing the private equity thing. This is just y'all are just doing direct ownership, or
well, what we're going to do is, so we are building our first one, which is our first personal wash here in Omaha, Nebraska, where we live. And we are going to take our model and we're going to franchise our model.
Awesome.
So then we're going to actually offer franchises to people who are interested in putting a big investment into something and making the big money, right? And being more active. And then we're also going to offer, we're starting a fund for all the real estate. So we're kind of going to do the McDonald's method here and own all the real estate and have the franchisees lease the real estate from us. Awesome. So we will have a fund that will raise capital for that particular piece of it. So it's basically like a triple net lease investment.
Now, let me ask you this. Is there an option where you don't own the real estate? And the other question I have is there an option where you don't have to be as involved? So as a real estate investor, as a business owner, I've always loved the idea of the franchises. The problem I ran into was like, oh, Chick-fil-A, it's an amazing company. I'd love to own a Chick-fil-A. Well, Chick-fil-A will give you a franchise if you spend 60 hours a week for a year standing in Chick-fil-A. Sterling doesn't have time to wait in the Chick-fil-A line, much less spend 60 hours a week there. So like, I've always been more attracted to the model of like, can we just buy a cash flowing business with a manager? You know what I mean? And so that's the one model. But then also as a business owner, as a real estate investor, like I want to own the real estate under the car wash too. So like where do you go from there?
So we will have the option for franchisees to come to us and say either like, I've already bought the lot and I want to put one of your franchises on it, and like, we're not going to be like, well, we have to buy your land, right. So it will be an option for them to own their own real estate, but our avatar is not going to have the capital to necessarily buy both the land, build the building, and pay
Sure.
for all the equipment.
So
So it will be an
how,
option, but it's not going to be our
how
number
much
one.
of a how much of a capital investment would this be?
It's actually pretty low. Especially, we're dealing in the world of apartments most of the time. So we're talking millions at a time, right?
Mhm.
So let me give you an example of our particular wash. It's one of the biggest car washes that we will sell as a franchise model, which is a 3-bay automatic. And it'll cost about 3 million to build the whole thing.
Mhm.
Well, with an SBA loan, you actually only need 10% down.
Mhm.
So we're only needing to inject about
300 grand.
$350,000 of equity
Nice.
to start this. So compared to an apartment, that is very affordable.
Sure, 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 sure. No, for sure. So when is the franchise model going to be available for purchase?
Yeah, so we obviously we want to get our corporate site built and start going. We are going to start promoting the franchise in September. We're almost done with all of our franchise legal documents and all that. So we're going to start in September going to like franchise expos to
Yeah,
start promoting it, but we won't allow purchase until next year, so 2024.
awesome. Why the delayed purchase?
Just so that we can have our
Proof
site
of
completely
concept.
open and running
Yeah.
before we're like, hey, buy more of these. And then hope our goal by marketing it early, before we allow investment, is to, kind of build up that list of contacts as well as find the lots in the interim. So we want to start buying the lots now and putting them into our fund. So then that way, by the time we're like, hey, we have 7 franchisees that are ready to buy a lot and we have options for them. Cause we don't want people coming to us and like, yep, I'm ready to go. And then we're like, well, we got to go find you a lot.
Nice.
Yeah. So, and I do feel like that'll be our ongoing challenge is having enough lots. I feel like our demand will be higher than our ability to find really great locations.
So tell me about the location search. Is it a similar, one of the asset classes I've looked at is like self-storage, and we
Mhm.
evaluate from like a traffic count, right? Like how many people are driving by. Or another one is like the density per person, like how many people is there per square mile or whatever. What
Yeah.
are the metrics you look at when you're determining whether it's going to be a great location for a car wash?
Yeah, there's about 30 different metrics that you look at. However, the top few I would say are definitely traffic counts. That's probably one of the number one because
How do you find that information?
um you can usually find it by like digging through the city's website and stuff like that. I know we found it before I was an agent, but now I'm an agent, so I have access to a couple other resources that I can tap into that just gives it to me right away. So you could potentially work with a real estate agent and be like, "Hey, can you get me the traffic counts for this lot?" And they would be able to
Awesome.
get it for you if you can't find it. But that's a huge metric with the pro forma is capture rate of the traffic count. So that's one of your big underwriting calculations.
Mhm.
And then, I mean, demand drivers around. So is it like ours is right next to a gas station, like literally the same parking lot? That's
Yeah.
huge. And the more gas they sell, so the bigger the gas station, the higher your capture rate from that.
Okay.
And then like for us across the street is a grocery store. So again, it's where people are not just driving by because you can have really great traffic counts, but
They
people
don't
just want to get
stop.
home.
Right.
Whereas that's where some of the tunnels make the mistake of like, well, there's 30,000 cars a day on this road, but yet there's like not a good entrance. You have to go a block off to come back around.
It's
It's
so
on a
true.
street where they're just going home, So you have to kind of put yourself in the consumer's mindset of like, what are
Yes.
they doing?
Be easy to do business with.
Yes,
That is
exactly.
that's that
Yeah.
is that's
So
that's
curb
the
cuts, elevation, like there's all these other, components to it, but definitely traffic counts and then drivers around are going to be your top two.
that's awesome. Is there any other asset classes y'all are looking at?
At the moment, kind of all of our energy is put onto these two because we are in the middle of construction with another hotel conversion. There's 144 rooms. So we're redeveloping that project at the moment. And then our lot closes in 2 weeks. So our construction will start in 2 weeks on this. So we're kind of in the middle of a lot at the
Yeah,
moment.
sounds like it.
So we're going to kind of focus on this for the next 6 months, I think.
That's awesome. So I want to go to our radio round real quick, just to let our listeners get to know you a little bit better. Just three
Yeah.
questions. The first one is, what's your favorite book?
My newest favorite book, because it changes all the time.
It changes every week. Yeah.
Is Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell.
That was my favorite book 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. So after reading that, I was like, duh. Because I had done, he says that like you end up being the administrative assistant of your own business because you hire out all the positions. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I totally did that with my business before, and I'm like, he's so right. And so this time I'm like, no, I'm hiring an executive assistant. And so about 3 weeks after I read that book, I got an executive assistant in place. So
that's awesome.
It was very beneficial to hear it from another perspective.
Yeah.
And he's not in real estate, so that's good too, to be like, every business needs this.
I love that book. One of my partners from the apartment complexes recommended I read it, and then I read it, and then I recommended to one of my best friends who's my CPA that he read it, and he loved it and gave it to people. So that's a great one.
Yeah.
The next one is, what's your favorite quote?
My favorite quote, and I'm probably gonna destroy it, and I couldn't even tell you who said it. I think when I found it, it was maybe anonymous, but this mountain was placed in front of you for you to climb it, basically. So like everyone's afraid of obstacles, and I feel like they don't see that the obstacle was put there for you because the universe knew that you were able to overcome it. Yeah. And so I know I'm totally butchering the actual quote, but it's like this mountain was placed.
I'm feeling the spirit of the quote. I'm feeling the spirit of it for sure. What's your favorite thing to do outside of work? Not that you and your husband have much time to do anything outside of work.
Right. I know.
The hotels and the car washes.
Our partner makes fun of us because like we schedule time to work on like our franchise stuff together, and he's like, most people go on dates and you two sit and write FDDs for a car wash.
There's nothing wrong with that. I took the bulk of the business activity for a long period of time. And now that my kids are going into school, my wife is integrating back into the business. And I just love that dynamic so much better, where we're like, we're working on everything together. We go home and like, we can talk, we're still talking to each other. We're talking about work things. It's not work I like the dynamic. It took me a long time to get there, but I find it a healthier way to grow together.
It is. Especially if your partner's your best friend, because if you don't have a healthy marriage, it's probably not going to be easy. But if, my husband, we've been married 18 years and he's my favorite person on the planet. So like, it's easy to work together when that's the case, But I would say aside from that, we just started kind of a fun little project with our kids where we're recording podcasts and we're teaching them like financial literacy and mindset and like stewardship and things that just kind of teaching everyone what we do with our kids. And we call it Raise Millionaires because we feel like it's a good way to set that path of making good choices and finding opportunity.
I got a copy of Cash Flow right there, and then a copy of Monopoly right next to it. My boys are 2 and 4, so they're not old enough to do either one of them. But as soon as they are, that's going to be the go-tos.
Yep. So I think we have 9 episodes recorded. And it's just been so fun. Like we have so much fun sitting together and making, podcasts together and then traveling with them. Our kids are 7, 10, and 14 at the moment. And so they're pretty easy as far as like, they're pretty independent. So we can travel and like, they can kind of do their own thing and we don't have to, helicopter over them and make sure we don't even have to feed them. We're like, are you hungry? Make your own food, so it's fun to travel with them.
So there's hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
Oh yes. You're in the thick of it, but it gets easier. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, how can our listeners get in touch with you, learn more about you, follow you on social?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn or generationalwealthcapital.com is our website. And then we do have a website for our podcast, so raisemillionaires.com. And we have socials for all of that as well. If you're a parent looking to maybe listen to a quick 15-minute podcast with your kids while you're taking them to soccer practice or something, it's a good one.
That's cute. I love the idea. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed it. I learned a ton about car washes, about hotel conversions. I'm sure our listeners will have more questions and reach out to you. So thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to keeping up with you on your journey.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate your time.
This episode was brought to you by Crestworth Capital. If you're a busy professional and ready to make passive income from real estate investing, then go to crestworthcapital.com, where you'll be able to download a free copy of our ebook to help you get started today. Until next week, happy investing.